Hi, I'm Kathryn.
And I'm Theresa.
And we are the co-authors of the book, Pass the Baton, Empowering All Music Students.
Our goal is to share stories of educators who are passing the baton and empowering their music students. We want to help teachers create music lessons that transform students from passive consumers to vibrant creatives. Welcome back to the Pass the Baton podcast. We're here to talk about all things student empowerment in music education. Before we introduce today's guest, we want to remind you to follow or subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes.
In addition, if you like what you hear today, please consider leaving a rating or review. That's what helps podcasts like Pass the Baton grow. So what'd you think today, Theresa?
Oh, this is such another great conversation. Allison really left me with a lot of things to think about. Even though I'm not, I don't have a band program. I don't have my own program right now. Just thinking about what my values are as a music educator and how I want that to come through in the classes that I teach and how I can, incorporate that with the students that I work with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was really nice to get to meet her and get to know her a little bit better. And I kind of want to maybe go to F-Flat Books or Amazon and purchase a workbook because I feel like it does feel like such a big task, but she broke it down so beautifully today. And while it is a big task, it's such an important task. And, I just think if there was someone kind of pushing me along, I could really go somewhere with it.
Yeah.
So,
and, not to use her pun, but you can also see the value in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. It's great to see you and be here again. Today, Kathryn and I are joined by Allison Russo. We were just saying, Allison, how in the world did we meet? And I think we decided it was a mutual friend, right?
Yeah, I believe so. I everything that happened like during the pandemic just feels like a big bowl of alphabet soup. So I'm not entirely sure exactly when we met or where we met, but let's say a mutual friend, the internet,
yes.
Fate,
all of those things. Yeah. Well, we are so glad to have you here. And I guess let's start by, can you introduce yourself? Tell us about your background, what you're up to in music education.
Sure. So I am an educational consultant, and my main job is to guide teachers and teaching artists to create more ethical and engaging music learning and teaching spaces. So I do that through the lenses of culturally responsive teaching and educational psychology. And I usually use a lot of methods that are strategic planning or strategic planning like or esque or ish. So those are my main thoroughfares that I work through. And I work with both schools and nonprofits because I have a background in both school work and nonprofit work. Right out of college, right out of Ithaca College, I started teaching in Ithaca City Public Schools, which was wonderful. It was like my dream job. I was teaching elementary school band. And it was interesting being in the same city that I had done my undergrad in. So I was teaching some of my professors' kids. So that was kind of an interesting dynamic, you could say. And so I taught there for a handful of years, learned a lot, and then started working, long story short, at a nonprofit down here in New Jersey, which is where I work now. I thought it was going to be a temporary job for the summer while I was looking for a school job. And then I blinked and 6 years passed. So I stayed at that nonprofit for a long time as a jazz education nonprofit. And I was, my two main roles there were working with bringing jazz education into schools, primarily in Newark, but all around New Jersey. And then also running a gender equity program because there's an enormous gender gap, especially in instrumental jazz. So I helped create sort of the philosophy and programming behind that program. And so it was sort of the combination of some realizations of when I was in the classroom, realizing that my undergrad, while it prepared me very well, it only prepared me to teach music and not children. And then working with the nonprofit, realizing that the social and cultural and emotional skills and values in a classroom was at least half the battle, so to speak, to creating, better creative and musical outcomes. Those were sort of the realizations that led me to kind of go out on my own and figure out how all of these things intersect and help other music teachers and music professionals make those sort of discoveries on their own and what that means to their individual music learning and teaching communities. That's the nutshell.
So I know another wonderful thing, though, that's come out recently is that you published a book. It sounds like part of some of that work is in that book, right? So
yes.
Can you help us? I know one of the major things is this what a value-based music program is. So could you share with us what that is? And
Sure. So the book is called Planning on Purpose, Creating a Values-Based Music Program. And the reason why I wrote this book was, not just because of those realizations that I had before, but also because I feel like what I learned from being in a nonprofit and the nonprofit philosophy of being mission driven and needing everything to have a reason and have a priority and looking at a program really holistically, way beyond what the curriculum is, but how do we entice people to join a program? How do we keep them in the program? And also what skills beyond musical are really being activated and encouraged in the program? Is there a sense of equity and all of those things you need in a nonprofit to be able to defend to the people who are funding it? And in a school music program, you aren't necessarily trained on how to look at your program that holistically. It's sort of, you're taught, okay, here's how you make a curriculum, here's how you teach music, maybe a little bit of here's how you teach kids, but how do you manage? You have an entire program, you're part of a community, you are dealing with things that are way deeper than a steady beat, or scales or things like that. So that was kind of the impetus for the book, is that when you're creating a values-based music program, that program is designed and then continually driven by the unique needs and principles and culture of a community. So it's not just whatever is in your cabinet, whatever you learned in your undergrad, whatever you can scrap together and just put in front of children, which we've all been in panic mode, survival mode, just get it done. And I'm not trying to shame anybody who just, pushes things together just to get by. I understand that. But when you have enough mental space and capacity to slow down and think about what you're really doing and achieving and how it is serving the people that are in front of you, even just the idea of that is like, okay, then how do I actually do that? So the book is literally a step-by-step, how do I actually do that? How do I design and then continually drive my program to move towards equity, to move towards real, authentic connection? How do I actually do that instead of just like hoping and wishing and crossing your fingers that might be happening? That's what the book is.
Wow. There's so many things that you're saying that I'm not, you can see me sitting here and just nodding my head. Everything that you're talking about goes back to that purpose. And I feel like, Kathryn, we've said this like the last several interviews that we've had. It's amazing when people are really connected to the purpose and what they're doing. And I love that you're helping teachers figure that out. Because it's one thing to say, yes, what are your values? Or what's the purpose behind what you're doing? But to really understand how to go through step by step, that's not something that comes naturally to a lot of us.
Yes. And not even that first step of figuring out your own values doesn't necessarily come naturally. It's something that the reason why I feel confident teaching other people to do this is because it's something that I have struggled to do, because I'm the kind of person who wants to be able to be everything for everyone, but you can't. You just can't. At some point you have to make a decision of, okay, what am I capable of, and what do my students actually need when it comes to what style of music I'm teaching, what opportunities I'm providing, because you can't do everything. And if you try to do everything and you try to be everything and you try to teach everything, then you're kind of doing nothing. You're not actually showing to your students what is most important, not just to you, but to your entire community.
Yeah. Another thing I think I hear you say is it's not me, it's we.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
I mean, me can't, little old me can't do it all, and shouldn't, because it should
Yes.
be a we.
Exactly. And I think we sometimes forget, especially when you're right out of school and you feel like such an expert on so many, you're like, I know Schenkerian analysis and all this stuff. Nobody cares. And I love Schenker. So but nobody cares except for nerds like me, but you have so much brilliance in your students that sometimes you get so pigeonholed and getting obsessed with your own, I don't know, Schenkerian analysis that you don't even recognize the amazing things that are already in your students. And this is like a whole other tangent I love to go on in another session. I do it at conferences all the time about musical prodigies and musically gifted students, and how we imagine that musical giftedness and genius is yo-yo ma, end of story. But there's so many other ways to be incredibly good at music, like being a great music producer or being a rapper or being a great arranger. I know people who are, adults and professionals, and their real strength is being an arranger. And if we don't kind of open our minds and eyes and even our hearts to be willing to listen to what our students actually are bringing to us every day, we're really missing out on some incredible things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh boy, we could go deep on that one. Just thinking about
I'm
who goes to music school. But yeah.
Oh Lord.
I know.
That's another thing.
Well, all right. We will save that for another day.
Yes. Yeah, that's not even in the book. That's a whole other thing.
Yeah, book 2. Yeah. Okay, so bringing it back to the
Go ahead.
So thinking back to the values, right? The values-based program. And this is, obviously you wrote a whole book on it. So it's not something that we can just magically fix the whole thing in one podcast episode, right?
No,
but as nice as that would be, one thing that you did talk about was this idea of a values statement. And that seems like something that's kind of tangible that maybe we can get into in one podcast episode. So can you tell us what is a value statement? What's it going to look like?
Sure. So a value statement, and this is coming from the nonprofit worlds, but schools and other educational facilities and operations also have value statements and mission statements and strategic plans. They also have this, but it's just not quite as normalized. So a value statement is either like a collection of words or short statements that lays out what are the primary principles that are driving the reasoning why we are enthusiastically doing this work together. And this work together can be your band or orchestra program. So it is kind of your driving, I don't want to say values again, you're driving principles behind why you do what you do, right? So it can be extended by adding like a mission statement, which is more of like the doing. The values is more like the why. The mission is more like this is what we do. And then there's also like a community agreement and the consequences, and that's sort of like these are the rules and what the consequences are for following the rules. But all of those things stem from a values statement, which again can just be like literally 5 words that are like the 5 key values, or it could be we have a value of honesty means to us blah blah blah, and there can be 5 of those. So short version, long version, both valuable. Pardon the pun. And that's what a value statement is. And value statements are best created in community. They should not be an edict from on high, because if they are an edict from on high, then it's really just your own opinion, this top down, like, this is why we are here and it is your values, which some of your students might latch onto, but some is not quite good enough. We can do better than that. So if you wanted to create a value statement for your band or orchestra program or your choir program, it's best made in community with your students, and even better with people outside of the community as well, or outside of, your student body as well. So even families, other adults in the building. In the book, as a small tangent here, that's the first part of the process in the book, is actually surveying your students, their families, the adults in the community, about what they value about music, about education, and about music education. And then you build a program off of what you collect from them. It's a doozy of a project, but yes, you can, a smaller, more attainable, more can talk about on one podcast portion is co-creating a value statement just for your kids in your program.
Can you walk us through, like, what might this look like, or give us like an example of either something you've tried or an organization you've worked with or something like that?
Right. So, first thing to do whenever you're going to do something kind of like this philosophical, esoteric sort of thing, especially if you're doing it with kids, is to put it into context first. Say, like, we're going to create this value statement, and like jump to the end and say, this is what we're going to do with it. Okay, this is why we're doing this process. And I'll go over like what it is that you can do with it at the end of of these steps. But the first thing is like to put it into context so that they know what you're talking about, and you're not just like shooting the breeze with them. So the best way to sort of tackle this, once they sort of understand why you're tackling it, is to just start brainstorming, especially if you've never had these kind of conversations before. Like, keep it really casual. It doesn't need to be like a formal survey necessarily, though. If that's kind of your vibe, then go for it. But it's really important that you have equal input from students, that you don't have like your leaders that are just sort of deciding for everyone. You really want it to get information from each and every individual student. So you could do this easily like an exit ticket for a rehearsal, or you could even do it if you have lesson groups and you have a smaller groups of kids. You're not necessarily doing it in your big orchestra rehearsal. And depending on how old your kids are and kind of like what their command of like describing their thoughts or feelings is, how comfortable they are, typically, you might want to either give them a list of values to choose from, or you can let them kind of create their own. But I would say the key question you can ask them is, which of these, if you're giving them a list of values, which of these has been most important to you in your experience in band or orchestra, or, fill in the blank. So that sort of puts them in the mindset of thinking, okay, which of these things is most important to me here? Because we don't necessarily need to know what their values are outside of the program. I mean, you could still ask those things. It's great, to get to know your students. But if you're looking to create like almost a slogan, which is like a value statement is like kind of close to a slogan, it's not like catchy like a slogan, then you want to, keep it in the context of your band room or your orchestra room. So some examples of what a value might be for your program, something like competition, discipline, knowledge, confidence, belonging, friendship, recognition, challenge, teamwork, passion. Did I already say passion? Loyalty, honesty. These are all sort of things that you can have a value inside and outside of your ensemble room. But some of those things, I mean, I'm thinking about my experience as a student, and I know that if I was handed a list of values, I would be able to circle which ones resonated with me when thinking about my experience in my high school band program, like loyalty, absolutely, belonging, friendship, competition, like all of these things, I would just be like, oh yes. And that's the key thing about doing any of this sort of values discovery, your own personal values or your students' values, it's kind of like a gut instinct thing, where you don't necessarily have to think too hard about, does this word associate with my experience in band or orchestra? It should just be an immediate, like, sparks joy sort of thing. Like, oh yes, ding, this makes sense for me. And it'll really reveal how your students experience your classroom. And all of these values should be like positive words. You don't need people have competition is sort of like a loaded one. You might want to exchange that one for achievement, which is still sort of loaded, but like a little less loaded. That's another podcast. You want your value statement to be all the reasons why they are motivated to be in your program, not why they are begrudgingly showing up. So hopefully each student would be able to feel some sort of excitement about at least a couple of those words as associated with your program. So once you kind of like brainstormed and got sort of like the raw data from everyone, it would be the adult's job to sort of combine and refine and narrow down and like look for trends, and then say, okay, these are like, you could, for example, say, okay, these are the top 10 that I saw from a lot of people. Okay. Now we're going to vote or narrow down to 5. A value statement should be 3 to 5 values. You don't want it to be much longer or much shorter. That's like kind of the sweet spot, is 3 to 5. More than 5, it's like hard to remember all of them, and less than 3 is not enough. So you could, again, do this in like small group discussions and like lesson groups. And you could also, have students sort of create those definitions of the values. Like, one of our values is trust. Trust means blah, blah, blah to us. And that'll, put a little bit more oomph and heft into the thing. And so by the time you've all sort of agreed on what the top 5 are, and you'll get some really interesting arguments and discussions about this. One of my favorite things is getting students to argue with each other. Discuss passionately, I should say, not like fight each other. You know what I mean? I always get thrilled when kids like raise their voices at each other. I know that's weird. But like thinking and wanting to communicate so passionately with each other, it's always like doing something right. But once you have these 5 words or 5 short statements, then you have to do something with it. This is like the part that makes me want to scream the most, is that you can't just create this and then put it in a drawer or like save it on a Google form and then like forget it ever happened. You have to do something with it, or else all the kids are going to be like, what was that all about? And then you've wasted your time. So what do you do with it? And this is the context you put with it in the beginning. You make it very visible and top of mind, so that whenever your students or you are making decisions together about opportunities or curricular decisions, or, maybe some drama comes up and some interpersonal drama, and you're trying to work it out with, little restorative practices here. You can look at your values and say, okay, which of these is not being honored here? What is exactly the problem? And you can go back to why we're here. What is the purpose of what we're doing, what we are driven by. And that kind of keeps everyone on this sense of belonging to something positive, right? So it gives you that sense of togetherness, and you're bound together by these cohesive sense of values. You should try to like every maybe like 3 to 5 years, or 3 or 4 years, refresh it. Because you're going to have a whole new set of students and things are going to be different. You don't have to do this every single year, but it's something that you can, whenever it's refreshed or renewed, you can make posters of it. You can put it as like a tagline on your email. You can put it on your website. You can communicate it with your administration. It's also going to make things easier, like when you're writing grants or asking your administration for something and say, this program is really activating our program's values of achievement and belonging. I don't know, whatever it is. And it just makes a lot of decisions a lot easier. And it makes recruitment a lot easier too, because students can see you're not just joining up with the band to play clarinet, but you're also joining a program that stands for trust and honesty and challenge and passion. That's like a lot more compelling than the clarinet. Not to dish on the clarinet, but it's just a lot more compelling of a reason to join a program, because you're not just picking up an instrument, you're joining a program, you're joining a new family. It's so much deeper. And this is just a way to articulate all of those things. Those are, wow, I think that was it. So that was a lot of stuff. I apologize for like that huge rant. That's how I would do it. It's totally doable in a couple of weeks or a month or so.
Yeah.
To create value stream.
And what I hear you say is like, there's this, once you've made this shared value
Mm-hmm.
statement, there's just this shift in the classroom, right? Or wherever you are, with the community that you're with, whether it's learners or, and like, I guess my next question would be like, what's the learner experience like then? I'm hearing you say they have all these decisions they help share, making decisions with, but like,
Mm-hmm.
how does the learner experience change from before you did something like this?
Right. Well, I think one of the best things about doing this is that it challenges your students to think about things that they hadn't considered before, because especially when they're trying to decide in a group and narrow things down, they'll have to defend their opinions. You start with this gut instinct of like, achievement really means something to me in this program. But then you start saying, okay, but why? Why is that important to me? And then you start to realize that other people have different opinions than you do. And so you don't care if we win or lose at the band competition, but I really care. That means a lot to me. And then you start to realize that you start to realize that some people who you thought were really different from you actually have a lot of the same things in common. It starts bringing up a lot of conversations that don't necessarily come up naturally unless you like go out of your way to have them. And I think it can really solidify a student's like positive feelings. I mean that like really generally they're positive feelings for a program, because they're not only going to have to acknowledge for themselves why I really care about being in band and orchestra or choir, but also be able to express to other people, this is why it's really important to me. And when I was running the gender equity program at the Jazz nonprofit, one of my favorite things, because it always ended up in like little arguments, was I would ask this burning question at some of our luncheon meetings. And this was an opportunity just for our students to have discussions like this. And I would ask things like, would you want to be called to a gig knowing you were being called as the token female on the bandstand? And I don't think a lot of them had thought about that before, because they're like middle schoolers and high schoolers and it's not really coming up. But their answers really reflected how they felt about being a woman in jazz. And they had different opinions, and then it solidified their own opinions, and it connected them with students that they wouldn't normally connect with. And, some of them were saying, I would hate to know that I was, being called just to tick a box. And some of them were like, I don't care. I want that money. Like, I just want that exposure. I just want to be on the bandstand. And they had some really interesting conversations. And I just sat there like, cool. And all I had to do was pose the pose the question, and having already set up a culture where they were comfortable having these kind of arguments or disagreements with each other, it really, it opened themselves and to each other just by asking the question.
Yeah.
So it can be really a transformative experience for even shy kids.
Oh, I mean, all I hear, I could just keep hearing you say, like, I get to share my voice in the ensemble, and people are going to listen to my voice, and I have choice in what I'm doing. And like, there's just so much power in that, because it's the we. It's not, your band, it's our band. And there's so much power in that.
Yeah. And I can just imagine a student seeing up on the wall the poster of their values and just being like, you know what, that one, I really contributed to that one, or this one meant a lot to me today. Or, you know what, I was not feeling this, this value of truth and honesty or whatever it is today. And, I feel like I can articulate that to somebody. It gives them some language to step up and make a change if something does need to change for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That just the ownership piece, both of how they're taking ownership of as part of the program, but also of themselves. Right? I think a lot of times students kind of just go through the motions and do the things. And we as adults do the same thing, right? We just we do, and we, do what we're told, and we just move along. But really being able to have that ownership, and being able to say, this is what I believe, and I am part of this organization because they have the same beliefs. That's huge.
Huge, major. And it changes not only how you treat yourself and think about yourself, but how you're going to exist socially with the other people in the program as well.
Yeah.
Very much so.
I love it. So if somebody listening is, they're in, they're like, I'm ready, but maybe they're not ready to like make the massive thing happen. What could they do tomorrow or next week to either start this process, make a shift, something like that?
Yes, that's a great question, because it is, what I'm talking about is a long process, and you cannot do it tomorrow. For example, the book Planning on Purpose is like a 5 to 7 month process. So you cannot do it tomorrow. Sorry. But you could, here's a couple of things that you could do. You could start the process of a value statement like now. Excuse me. And, spring is not such a bad time to do it, because they've been in the program for, the whole year, hypothetically, and you've really eased into that culture. So, this is even a good thing to do sort of towards the end of the year, even like post spring concert or something like that, when there's usually a little bit more wiggle room. Just think about, okay, how can we like set up next year really strong, or like get ready for band camp or something like that. So you could start that process of co-creating a value statement and just figuring out how you're going to introduce the concept of a value statement, and maybe gather some of the values, to get started. There's a list of values in the book. There's over 100 values that you can get started with, or you can literally email me and I'll send it to you. I have no qualms about that. So that's a process that you could get started this week. Or even more simply, you can take a values quiz for yourself. So if you've never like done anything even remotely like this before, it'll take you 10-15 minutes, and there's a billion of them online, like, lists of values and, ways to, assess your own personal values. You don't necessarily have to do it for, your entire personal life. You could just think about it, just, who you are at work. Both are valuable. I laugh every time I say that. So you could just have that experience for yourself. And that'll help you kind of empathize with students in how sometimes like confusing it can be to uncover your own values. I do this process at like state conferences when I do these presentations, and teachers will take these values assessments, and they'll be like, I had these 2 values that jumped out at me, but they're like the opposite. And I'm like, I know, isn't that crazy? You're complicated. And so it's this like, okay, how do I feel about these 2 you know, opposing forces that I feel very passionately about. What does that mean about me? Does it mean I don't know what I'm doing, or is it to mean that I'm complicated? And it often brings up a lot of complex things. So it's good if you've never done anything like this before to do that for yourself before you ask your students to do it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And it does that feels like, yes, I could do this tomorrow. And then
yes, you could do it today, 10 or 15 minutes, but it's going to stick with you for a long time, because then what does it mean? What does it mean? And some people do that assessment and everything is like this really clear cut, like through line, like I am very singular. And maybe you never really realized that before, that you had such a strong conviction about something. It's always interesting. It's always interesting.
Very cool.
Yeah. I think something else that you brought up earlier was this idea when you give kids, a voice and choice when they're coming to become or make a valued statement, there's got to be a safe environment where that happens, right? So that people feel willing to offer their thoughts. So how do you build community in your classroom?
My thing with building community is trust and trust and trust. I think a lot about trust. It's like a whole like educational psychology portion of my brain is like 80% of it is dedicated to the concept of trust. And trust is not just about, we often think about it like the relationship between student and teacher, like, do you trust each other or does your student trust you? But it's even more complex than that. It's about students trusting themselves, students trusting each other, and even more like esoterically, it's things like, do the policies and principles and rules and regulations in your school and in your classroom, do they express trust in your students, or is it more of like a police state? No one's allowed to do anything. All of these different webs of trust really impact what the vibe is in your classroom. So things that build trust is there's a lot of things that build trust, but primarily letting your students and yourself equally getting to know each other as people. And often when we're in band and orchestra and choir rooms, we're making music. And even though making music is a social act, we sometimes get so like drilled down to the technicalities of the notes and rhythms that we're not even the students are not even communicating it to each other in any way, shape, or form. So whether that's giving opportunities to get to know each other within the classroom setting, or creating more opportunities for them to get to know each other in purely social events, which is a lot easier when you're like a marching band. It seems like it's an extra thing to tack on, but it actually does so much for the musical and creative outcomes. And I learned this like the hard way, back to that gender equity program, that the first time we ran this program, this residency, it was, they had their horns on their faces, 99% of the time. And then at the concert at the end, I saw like these 3 trumpet players who never would have met normally. They're totally from different cities and totally different like communities. And they became best friends at the concert. And then 20 minutes later, the whole thing was over. And I was like, shoot, I totally missed an opportunity for these friendships to really blossom. But luckily they all came back and now they're like still really good friends, and it like warms my heart. But from then on, it was like, okay, how do they get to know each other so that they know when they clam a note or they panic and when it's their turn to solo and don't know what to do and don't play anything, they know or are very, very confident that the other people in the room are not only not going to laugh at them, they're going to cheer them on and help them. And they don't know that until A, they've tried, and B, they get to know the people who are in the room. So it is trust, trust, trusty, trust in every direction. That's the short version of my rant on trust.
Yeah. I love that. And you can see the groups and the ensembles where trust has been built. And then you can see where there's still room for growth, for sure.
Yes, you can definitely tell when, and this I see a lot in the jazz world, you can tell when students have been taught to improvise in a way that's very technical, like memorize these things, drill these patterns and all of these things. Mm-hmm. And they can do all of those things, but then when it comes to actually doing it in front of other people, there's just a lot of pressure and tension, and there hasn't been enough like nurturing of, even acknowledgement that it's scary or intimidating. You can tell they play differently. They play it differently. And they also do not burn out because they think that music is just like this mathematical equation of I put in the time, I memorize the things, and then they realize they haven't been playing music this whole time. And then they burn out, even if they're really, really good,
Wow. Oh, that's all. It's so much good stuff to think about. It's deep. Right?
Yeah, it's frustrating. This is I sometimes I felt like I was screaming into the void a lot. Like just like, does nobody else recognize that this is total BS? Like, come on.
Yeah.
Like it's so important to not only prepare our students for being musically successful, but to also prepare them for the frustrations of not being musically successful, and acknowledging that you need both of those things to actually be successful.
Yes.
Frustration tolerance.
Yeah. Important.
I don't know frustration tolerance. Sometimes I can't follow my own advice.
Well, yes. I mean, I think a lot of us have that problem, but like the whole moments when you're saying you can't be everything, like, but can't you?
But aren't I supposed to be everything? Yes, I feel like that's definitely a problem amongst teachers where you do as I say, not as I do, right?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah,
girl, you need a break, but not me. I need to work to the bone.
Right.
Listen to yourself sometimes.
Oh my goodness, yes. All right. So if people are, again, they're into it, they want to connect with you, they want to learn more, they want to know all the things Allison Russo, how can they do it?
Well, you can follow me on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. My handle on all of those is @thecriticalgood, which is my consulting company. Or you can go on my website at thecriticalgood.com. And you can find my book on flatbooks.com or Amazon.
All right.
I don't know.
Make sure. Yeah, I think I may have ordered there once before.
Yeah, I don't know if it's like a new thing. Amazon, they have like a couple of things you can buy. They're pretty good. So
cool.
Well, if you want to buy from a small business, buy from F-Flat.
Oh yes, we are big F-Flat supporters here. So absolutely. We'll have all those links in the show notes to make sure that people know where to find you and to get a copy of the book. Thank you so much. This has been really fun and inspiring and just all the good things. So we appreciate it.
I love everything that you guys do. And I'm grateful that you had me on to not scream into the void, but yell enthusiastically in the choir.
Yes. It's perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much.
You're quite welcome.
Thanks for joining us. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
We'd also love for you to consider sharing this podcast with a friend and leaving a positive review. That's one of the best ways to get this message to new listeners.